Um, let's see. So I've been breaking, like I didn't really expect to go like on this journey on Daniel 11 so much, but but it's like the more I've gotten into it, the more I've thought, it's kind of cool and then I think important to understand these things because it's teaches you a perspective that the Jews had on history and a lot of times, in our circles, when you get to Daniel 11, people just kind of like go, okay, here's a whole bunch of history, but let's talk about the abomination that causes desolation and how that's going to happen in the future, and then have a lot of what I think are speculative things about the coming Antichrist. But um, I used to think, not that long ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, that there was a break in Daniel 11 where all of a sudden those things couldn't be accounted for by history anymore. And since then, I've been reading some commentary, and I was going, wait, all of this can be accounted for. So when Jesus comes around and says, that there is when you see the abomination that causes desolation as spoken of by Daniel, even though Antiochus Epiphanes is in the past for him, he's referring to something in the future, but he's not referring to it in the way that like that Daniel had originally written it for something that was still in Jesus's future, right? He's telling you about it, or what Jesus is saying something. What happened with Antiochus Epiphanes is going to happen again, and that's why I've kind of gotten that it made me kind of take pause and say, well, what all did happen with Antiochus Epiphanes, and what were the circumstances surrounding that? And of course, we have Josephus, and we have the Maccabees, we have a number of historians, um, but I think that if you're looking at like the historians will always just tell you things from their point of view, which I do treat Josephus that way, and I treat the Maccabees as that way. But I'd rather hear from their point of view, being Jews, than say by Greek historians, from the time. Just because for the Greek historians, they will omit and they'll things, and they'll just try to explain things a lot differently than somebody who especially about Jerusalem, or they might barely even mention Jerusalem. So anyway, this is an old bust of Antiochus Epiphanes. I don't know how much he actually looked like this or not, but I don't know where this is. So just to kind of we'll just briefly recap where we're at. The chapter 11 fast forwards through a bunch of key kingdoms and ends up in the post Alexandrian Greek Empire, where it gets divided up into four different kingdoms. And of course, we're just going to be looking at the northern kingdom called the Seleucids, and then the Ptolemies down here in the south. So the power center here would be Egypt. Up here, it would be uh, what do you call it? Antioch. So Antiochus and is his headquarters is in Antioch. Of course, here you've got Israel, sort of like right in the middle of the two, and they kind of fight over this area. And sometimes they make pacts and agreements to kind of get along, and they'll say, "Okay, well, if you marry my daughter, or if or let's write this down." But of course, those pacts end up being broken, and they fight over Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, with Joppa nearby being the main port and this being the main trade route in this area. Everything from Africa is, coming from this area of Africa is going through here to go get up to Asia Minor, and it's also a great port, compared to the the marshy areas of Egypt, or the cliffy areas north of Israel. So it ended up being the most key trade route. So it was you got small Jerusalem, but it's vitally important for both kingdoms. The way that you get to Antiochus the Fourth, you have successors and sons of so and so and sons of so and so. But when you get to Antiochus, Antiochus is actually the brother of the last ruler, and so he's actually not eligible to be for the kingdom. He's not eligible for the kingdom. So he actually weasels his way into the throne. He's not supposed to be there. Seleucus, the previous king, had two sons. They should have been his heirs, but the oldest one, Demetrius, was in prison in Rome, and I think the youngest was kind of too young to really rule. What happened was Heliodorus, that's the guy who was the tax collector, that got stomped on by the angelic horse and rider and whipped by those angels. He had seized the throne supposedly in the name of the younger brother Antiochus. So he's in Jerusalem. So he's actually like he'd gone from Jerusalem and up into Antioch, and now he's kind of ruling after Seleucus, but he's not supposed to be there. What happens is Antiochus himself had been in prison in Rome, but when he got out, he just seized the throne in the name of Demetrius, the older brother, and Heliodorus fled. So both of them kind of like tried the same sort of shenanigans. Well, I'm just going to rule for so and so, because they're not available right now, or they're not ready. And but of course, Antiochus ended up being able to intimidate Heliodorus, and Heliodorus kind of ended up out of the picture. So that's how Antiochus took over. You've also got illegitimate high priests going on. So everybody's just illegitimate king, and then an illegitimate high priest. So we've covered this story before. Ananias, who is the legitimate high priest and apparently a devout man, he has a brother who bribes Antiochus once Antiochus gets into power. He bribes Antiochus for the high priest position, and Antiochus had Ananias removed. So this Jason guy, he actually Hellenized Jerusalem. He not only bribed Antiochus, but he said, can we have money to build a gymnasium? And can we be members of and citizens of Antioch? And he pushed Jerusalem full-fledged into this Greek way of life with Greek gods and Greek practices. And a lot of the priesthood abandoned their post and went headlong into this whole Hellenized system. In fact, most of Jerusalem ended up being extremely Hellenized, and there was really just a remnant now of people who stayed true to Yahweh. So now that becomes key, because that is the corruption of Jerusalem from within. So Menelaus comes on the scene a bit later on, and it appears from some things that he's a brother of Jason. In other accounts, I don't think he's a brother. Maybe he's just mentioned as a brother because he's a fellow Jew. I'm not really sure. But there's another guy named Menelaus, and he offers a bigger bribe, and he got into the office, and he actually robs the temple. Some say to pay for, the bribe, but there seems to be other things that were involved in it too. So he's pawning off, the temple treasures in order to make bribes to other people and make deals with other people. And of course, this outrages Ananias, the priest who's now in hiding, kind of, and he protested this desecration of the temple. And Menelaus doesn't want to hear it, and Menelaus has Ananias killed. So later on, Jason would come back and attack Menelaus to get the high priesthood back. And this is what would actually trigger Antiochus to come to Jerusalem and attack it. And that's what we're going to, that's what we're starting here with in verse 28. It says in verse 28, and he shall return to his land. That's Antiochus will return to his land. He's been down in Egypt, right? He shall return to his land with great wealth, wealth from Egypt, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. So Barnes, I'm going to actually quote Barnes quite a bit here. Barnes is a Presbyterian theologian and lived in the 1800s. He was actually an abolitionist and everything. Kind of interesting and really good. Read if you're going to read one source on Daniel 11, I think Barnes is about the best. Well, he's the best I've read. I think that's just my opinion. But this is Barnes writing. When it was said in his heart, so it says here that in his heart it shall be set against the holy covenant. When it is said that his heart was against the covenant, the meaning is that he was enraged against it and determined to bring calamity upon the place and the people connected with it, Jerusalem and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. The reason of this was the following. When he was in Egypt, a report was spread abroad that he was dead. So there's this rumor going around that he died. In consequence of this rumor, Jason took the opportunity of recovering the office of high priest from his brother Menelaus. That's where it says his brother, right? Or, he's kind of quoting what's written down in Maccabees. So Jason basically hears, oh, Antiochus is dead. Now's my chance to grab the high priesthood back. So he attacks Menelaus. With 1,000 men, he took Jerusalem, drove Menelaus into the castle, and killed many whom he took for his enemies. Antiochus, hearing of this, supposed that the Jews had revolted. He thinks there's a revolt going on in Jerusalem, and he determined to inflict summary chastisement on them on his way back to his own land. So on the way back from Egypt, he's going to pass through Jerusalem, and he's going to lay waste to them. So in First Maccabees 1, this is the account. After subduing Egypt, Antiochus returned in 143rd year. He went up against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He arrogantly entered the sanctuary and took the golden altar, the lampstand for the light, and all its utensils. He also took the table for the bread of presence and the cups for drink offerings, the bowls, the golden censers, the curtain, the crowns, and the gold decoration on the front of the temple. He stripped it all off. He took the silver and the gold and the costly vessels. He took also the hidden treasures which he found. Taking them all, he departed to his own land. And here's kind of a artistic rendition of that. At the time, verse 29 and 30, it says, at the time appointed, he shall return. So remember, he ransacks Jerusalem on his way back to Egypt, goes to Egypt, but then a couple years later, he's going to come back and really cause destruction and torture to people. So it was bad enough the first time around, but now he's going to come back. So at the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, and it shall not be this time as it was before. It's interesting. It says at the time appointed, right? It says, this is done with the view in the prophecy that God appoints all these times, even though it's Antiochus Epiphanes and his shenanigans, God had an appointed time for everything, still in control, of course. Now, it's not going to be like before. He's not going to be successful coming to the south like he was before. First time he comes out with a bunch of treasure. The second time, it's not going to be the same thing. It says here, for ships of Kittim, which is actually Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, shall come out against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw. So this is what happened. In the south, so this is the king of Egypt, Ptolemy had made an alliance with Physcon, his brother, and they hired Greek mercenaries to help them. So they gang up together and they said, we're going to take on Antiochus in the north. They kind of pretended that they were playing along. Antiochus was pretending, eating at their table and treating Ptolemy nicely and everything, but Ptolemy didn't trust him. And so as we saw last time, they had been kind of like they'd been scheming together, but they were also scheming against each other. But they hired these Greek mercenaries to help them. And Antiochus hears of this, that they're going to gang up, and he prepared to attack Egypt again in 167 BC. So he sent ships to Cyprus to secure it while he sent troops to Egypt. So he sends two groups. He sends a navy force to Cyprus, and he sends a land force to Egypt. The Egyptians had called Rome for help. So the Romans are going to get involved here. And Rome sent ambassadors via Cyprus on Cyprian ships. So these would be the ships from Kittim. They are going to confront Antiochus and tell him that if he persisted, it would mean war with Rome. So they're going to basically tell him, you can do this, but if you do, you're going to be at war with us because we're here to help the king of Egypt. And when Antiochus said that he would lay the affair before his council, so Antiochus saying, well, I'm going to bring this before my council and everything. Popilius, the head of the legation, so the main guy from this ambassadorship right here, with his staff drew a circle around the king. So he drew a circle around Antiochus in the sand, and on which they stood and exclaimed, before you leave that circle, you must give me an answer which I can report to the Senate. So this is where that famous saying comes from, drawing a line in the sand. So this Pompilius guy, he draws a line in the sand. He says, you're not getting out of that circle until you give us an answer. Are you going to go to war with us or are you not? And so this, of course, humiliates Antiochus, and he leaves dejected and furious. So verse 30, part 2, it says, and he shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention, and other versions say have an understanding with those who forsake the holy covenant. So what happened is Antiochus, he's all mad now, and he would take it out on Jerusalem. He's just going to take it out on Jerusalem. He's like, he really doesn't like them, and now he's just going to take it on them like doubly. He would have an understanding with or pay attention to that portion of the Jews who had abandoned Judaism and embraced Hellenization, and there were quite a bit of them. So many pro-Seleucid Jews attacked their own people. They actually joined in with Antiochus and helped attack Jerusalem. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. So here we're finally at the abomination that causes desolation. So Antiochus, forth he forbade all Jewish practices and festivals on pain of death. He stopped the daily offerings in the temple. He banned circumcision. He burned copies of the Torah. Altars to his gods were set up throughout the land, and pigs, an unclean animal, were sacrificed on them. On December 16th, 168 BC, he set up an idol to Zeus in the temple, and he made sacrifices to Zeus on the temple altar in the temple. This is, where I believe he also sacrifices reportedly a pig in the Jewish temple on on God's altar. So he shall reduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. So this is kind of a summary of this. Many Jews compromised their beliefs and they joined the pagan practices. They were Hellenized. But there were also many Jews who resisted this Hellenization and these pagan practices. So one day there's this priest, his name is Mattathias, from the town of Modain in Ephraim. He refused to submit to the Seleucid delegation sent to his village, and he starts a rebellion. After his death, so he dies. After his death, the rebellion was led by three of his sons, Judas, Jonathan, and Simon. This is recorded in 1 Maccabees chapter 2. This started the Maccabean revolt, and which it grew so big that it eventually drove the Seleucid power out of Israel. And at Mattathias' death, Judas Maccabeus took over the rebellion. Eventually, he killed Apollonius. That was the general who Antiochus had sent into to attack Jerusalem. And he took back the temple and cleansed it on 16th December 164 BC. That is, this is about the rededication of the temple, where we read where Jesus goes to the festival of dedication, and of course where we get Hanukkah from. Antiochus IV died insane in Persia in 163 BC, and as I've said, and Antiochus Epiphanes, they used to nickname him Epimanes, which means madman. So he lost his mind. So let's go back here. So he'll seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. So he's going to flatter the Hellenizers, but the people who know their God and shall stand firm, including the Maccabeans, they'll take action, and the wise among the people shall make many understand. So when they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. So the Maccabean army was small, and they would take a lot of losses at first, but these small numbers, they got small numbers from here and there, and they gained momentum. But as they gained momentum and started becoming more and more triumphant and heroic, looking, a growing number would attach themselves to the Maccabean movement and the revolt, but not always out of the same motivations. It became for some people a way to, they were hoping to get plunder out of it. They were hoping to get some glory out of it. So they wanted to attach themselves to this movement. So it says, many shall join themselves to them with flattery. So it probably means something like that they flattered themselves. And I'm not really sure how what this word here means. It's a Hebrew word, and there's a little bit of a discussion about what the sentence means. But it's but historically, at least, we know that not everybody later on in the movement, as it grew, had great motivations. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it awaits the appointed time. So this appears to be talking, like time of the end. We kind of look at it and kind of glom onto it, saying, well, the time of the end, which is, in the future. This is talking about the end of days, so to speak, but it could just be talking about the end of this whole struggle. They would suffer defeats, and this would test the motives of those fighting. So is kind of going to purify it. First of all, it's going to clean out like those who aren't fighting for the right reasons. but it would also test the army themselves. It would test the people who were wise and were in it for the right reasons, and would purify their motives. So this is always kind of like a thing that you see in scripture too, is that those that God is going to is strengthen through people having to persevere and overcome, and that it purifies them. It's a refining through fire. So there is an appointed time and promised here and elsewhere to those who trust God. So there will be an end to the battle and a victory, as there was here. So this is, whether this is talking about a time for the end in our future or not, the same principle applies, is that God will purify you with some things that will bring suffering, and we're told consistently in especially like in Revelation, to hang on there, and for the person who overcomes, God has all these promises, right? This is this is an icon in the in the uh, uh, in the Orthodox Church. It's called the icon of the Maccabean martyrs. And there's a section in the Maccabees which talks about the torture of this guy right here, and then this mother and her 7 sons. And I thought we could read that, because it was, and it's interesting because they're here portrayed as saints. There's it's not like making a distinction. It's interesting that she's actually holding a cross. This would be because they saw the Maccabean martyrs as being one of our family of holy, holy Israel. Anyway, the martyrdom of Eleazar. Actually, what you're going to see too is that these people believed in a resurrection and were looking for their salvation and resurrection in the end. Says here, Eleazar, one of the scribes in high position, a man now advanced in age and of noble presence, was being forced to open his mouth to eat swine's flesh. So they're shoving swine's flesh into his mouth. But he, welcoming death with honor rather than life with pollution, went up to the rack. So there's these, torture racks where they're going to like beat somebody to death. He goes there on his own accord, spitting out the flesh, as men ought to go who have the courage to refuse things that it is not right to taste, even for the natural love of life. Those who were in charge of that unlawful sacrifice took the man aside because of their long acquaintance with him. So these are people who are like doing this, and they're in charge of this, are people who he's grown up with. They've known him for a long time. It's sad. These are fellow Jerusalem people, or people from his own village or wherever he's from, because of their long acquaintance with him, and privately urged him to bring meat of his own providing. So they're saying secretly, don't bring swine flesh, but pretend to be eating swine flesh, but you're really eating, beef or something, right? And pretend that he was eating the flesh of the sacrificial meal. The sacrificial meal means the sacrifice of the swine, right? You would eat a sacrifice, So, which had been commanded by the king. The king had ordained this, so that by doing this he might be saved from death, and secretly not really be sinning, right? And be treated kindly on the account of his own old friendship with them, but making a high resolve worthy of his years and the dignity of his old age and the gray hairs which he had reached with distinction, and his excellent life even from childhood. And moreover, according to the holy God-given law, he declared himself quickly, telling them to send him to Hades. He's like, just go ahead and send me to the grave. I'm ready to die. Such pretense is not worthy of our time of life, he said. So he's like, I'm not going to pretend. lest many of the young should suppose that Eleazar in his 90th year has gone over to an alien religion. He's like, I'm not going to pretend this because young people are going to see this and think that I have become Hellenized and gone over to them, and I don't want to influence them. Even if I was okay with pretending to eat a swine's flesh while I'm eating something else, I don't want the young people to get the wrong idea about this. And through my pretense, for the sake of living a brief moment longer, that they should be led astray because of me, while I defile and disgrace my old age. For even if for the present I should avoid the punishment of men, yet whether I live or die, I shall not escape the hands of the Almighty. Therefore, by manfully giving up my life now, I will show myself worthy of my old age, and leave to the young a noble example of how to die a good death, willingly and nobly for the revered and holy laws. When he had said this, he at once to the rack, and those who a little before had acted good towards him now changed to ill will because of the words he had uttered were, in their opinion, sheer madness. When he was about to die under the blows, he groaned aloud and said, "It is clear to the Lord in his holy knowledge that though I might have been saved from death, I am enduring terrible sufferings in my body under this beating. For in my soul I am glad to suffer these things because I fear him." So in this way he died, leaving in his death an example of nobility and a memorial of courage, not only to the young, but to the great body of his nation. Here's the story of the 7 brothers. It happened also that 7 brothers and their mother were arrested and were being compelled by the king under torture with whips and cords to partake of unlawful swine's flesh. One of them, acting as their spokesman, said, "What do you intend to ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our fathers." The king fell into a rage and gave orders that pans and cauldrons be heated. These were heated immediately. This almost sounds like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These were heated immediately, and he commanded that the tongue of their spokesman be cut out, and that they scalp him and cut off his hands and feet, while the rest of the brothers and the mother looked on. When he was utterly helpless, the king ordered them to take him to the fire, still breathing, and to fry him in a pan. The smoke from the pan spread widely, but the brothers and their mother encouraged one another to die nobly, saying, "The Lord God is watching over us, and in truth has compassion on us," as Moses declared in his song, which bore witness against the people of their faces, when he said, "And he will have compassion on his servants." After the first brother had died in this way, they brought forward the second for their sport. They tore off the skin of his head with the hair and asked him, they scalped him, "Will you rather eat than have your body punished limb by limb?" He replied in the language of his fathers, and he said to them, "No." Therefore, he in turn underwent tortures as the first brother had done. And when he was at his last breath, he said, "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his laws." So they definitely believe in a resurrection, After him, the third was the victim of their sport. And when it was demanded, he quickly put out his tongue and courageously stretched forth his hands. And he said nobly, "I got these from heaven, and because of his laws, I disdain them. And from him, I hope to get them back again." That's what a statement, and it shows you, like they're thinking, my body's going to be restored. Job knew this. "In my flesh, I will see God, even after my, like I've turned to ashes, basically." But and it's it's a corporate, it's not like this, like um some kind of a, it's like Christ resurrected, arms, legs, even holes in his hands, right? Not just some kind of like ethereal, like new body that's some other kind of like existence completely. It is, but it isn't, they understand some things about the resurrection here. As a result, the king himself and those with him were astonished at the young man's spirit, for he regarded his sufferings as nothing. When he too had died, they maltreated and tortured the fourth in the same way. And when he was near death, he said, one cannot but choose to die at the hands of men and to cherish the hope that God gives of being raised again by him. For you, there will be no resurrection to life. Next, they brought forward the fifth and maltreated him. But he looked at the king and he said, because you have the authority among men, mortal though you are, you do what you please, but do not think that God has forsaken our people. Keep on and see how his mighty power will torture you and your descendants. This is kind of like what's also in view here is the retribution that God has for those who have tortured God's people. This is something that Paul even talks about in Second Thessalonians chapter 1. He's like, God is just in bringing them retribution, and he's going to do this on the day that he comes back. After him, they brought forward the sixth. And when he was about to die, he said, do not deceive yourself in vain, for we are suffering these things on your account because of our sin against our own God. Therefore, astounding things have happened, but do not think that you will go unpunished for having tried to fight against God. Their mother was especially admirable and worthy of honorable memory. Though she saw her 7 sons perish within a single day, she bore it with good courage because of her hope in the Lord. She encouraged each of them in the language of their fathers. Filled with a noble spirit, she fired her woman's reasoning with a man's courage and said to them, I do not know how you came into being in my womb. It was not I who gave you life and breath, nor I who set in order the elements within each of you. Therefore, the creator of the world, who shaped the beginning of man and devised the origin of all things, will in his mercy give life and breath back to you again, since you now forget yourself for the sake of his laws. Antiochus felt that he was being treated with contempt, and he was suspicious of her reproachful tone. The youngest brother being still alive, Antiochus not only appealed to him in words, but promised with oaths that he would make him rich and enviable if he would turn away from the ways of his fathers, and that he would take him for his friend and entrust him with public affairs. He's going to put him in charge of a bunch of stuff. Since the young man would not listen to him at all, the king called the mother to him and urged her to advise the youth to save himself. After much urging on his part, she undertook to persuade her son, but leaning close to him, she spoke. So I guess what she's doing, she's gonna appeal to her son in Hebrew, but which the torturers don't understand. But this is what she tells him. But leaning close to him, she spoke in their native tongue as follows, deriding the cruel tyrant. My son, have pity on me. She's like, forgive me. I carried you 9 months in my womb and nursed you for 3 years, and I have reared you and brought you up to this point in your life and have taken care of you. I beseech you, my child, to look at the heaven and the earth and see everything that is in them, and recognize that God did not make them out of things that existed. Thus also mankind comes into being. Do not fear this butcher, but prove worthy of your brothers. Accept death, so that in God's mercy I may get you back again with your brothers. While she was still speaking, the young man said, what are you waiting for? I will not obey the king's command, but I obey the command of the law that was given to our fathers through Moses. But you, who have contrived all sorts of evil against the Hebrews, will certainly not escape the hands of God. For we are suffering because of our own sins, and if our living Lord is angry for a little while to rebuke and discipline us, he will again be reconciled with his own servants. But you, unholy wretch, you most defiled of all men, do not be elated in vain and puffed up by uncertain hopes when you raise your hand against the children of heaven. You have not yet escaped the judgment of the Almighty, all-seeing God. For our brothers, after enduring a brief suffering, have drunk of ever-flowing life under God's covenant. But you, by the judgment of God, will receive just punishment for your arrogance. I, like my brothers, give up body and life for the laws of our fathers, appealing to God to show mercy soon to our nation by afflictions and the plagues to make you confess that he alone is God. What does that remind you of? Every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And through me and my brothers to bring an end to the wrath of the Almighty, which has justly fallen on our own nation. The king fell into a rage and handled him worse than the others, being exasperated at his scorn. So he died with his integrity, putting his whole trust in the Lord. Last of all, the mother died after her sons. Let this be enough then about the eating of sacrifices and the extreme tortures. So here's another version of that. She's not holding she is holding a cross there. It's interesting. So when you read Hebrews 11, it's talking about the people who had died before Christ actually, came on the scene. So these are all Old Testament and intertestamental people that the writer of Hebrews is talking about. So when he gets there later on, he says some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. When it gets to this verse, you read a lot of commentary where they go into the Maccabean martyrs. And I think probably most commentators that I've read, will cite that. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were killed and stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. Actually, you're going to see the Mattathias and his sons. When they start the Maccabean revolt, they had been in hiding in the mountains and deserts and stuff. But all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. But they are in an indirect way in this hall of faith. Here's what I was talking about in 1 Thessalonians 1. Paul is talking to them, and he says, therefore, we ourselves boast about you in the churches of God for your steadfastness and faith in all your persecutions and in the afflictions that you are enduring. This is evidence of the righteous judgment of God, that you may be considered worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you are also suffering. Since indeed God considers it just to repay with afflictions those who afflict you, and to grant relief to you who are afflicted as well as to us, when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels, in flaming fire, inflicting vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. They will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might, when he comes on that day to be glorified in his saints and to be marveled at among all who have believed, because our testimony to you was believed. One reason I'm bringing this up is because this week I had read or I was listening to a podcast, and the Bible teacher was talking about I'm going through Revelation, book of Revelation again, this time with Dr. Stephen DeYoung, but he was saying when it talks about the Great Tribulation, in Revelation 7, like these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. I believe it's 7. It's either 7 or 8. When he sees he hears the 144,000, then he turns around and he sees not just Israel, but he sees countless people from all over the world. And he's asks one of the elders, who are these? And he says, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. A lot of times what we think of is just the great tribulation in the sense that it's one period of time, like a 3.5 year period or a 7 year period or something like that. But he said the people from the exile and Daniel's day on saw themselves as being in the great tribulation. There's probably not like a term for that, but it's definitely the things that Daniel is addressing, that there is tribulation on God's people, through different times of history. And so it made me think of this verse right here. See, I'm still chewing on that, okay? Because there is still a time coming when something big is going to happen. But there is a bigger scope here, where we're talking about something that's not just tied to a time. When I've been reading this in the past, and he's saying that, like, he's saying, hang on, Paul is talking to people here in the first century, and he's like, yeah, we actually brag about your enduring these persecutions. And then he's talking about the judgment of God, and that God is going to repay with affliction those who afflict you. It would appear that Paul is just thinking that Jesus is going to come back in their lifetimes, or in the lifetimes of the people who are afflicting them, right? Maybe he did think that, but that would that make him wrong? Is Paul just being wrong here? Well, Jesus is not going to come back during that time, and he's not going to repay them and afflict them for afflicting you. That's not like a satisfactory answer to me. He's saying that Jesus is still going to come back, and when he does, that is when he's going to afflict the ones who have afflicted.
At the final judgment.
This is a judgment, right? So what he's saying is that when Jesus comes back and is glorified with his saints, that is the day of the Lord, when he is going to bring judgment on those people. So when you see, like in Revelation 6, when those who have been martyred and for the name, for the cause of Christ, appear under the altar, they are asking, how long is it going to be, O Lord, before you take vengeance and before you vindicate us, And he says, wait a little while longer until the full number of your brothers comes in. What John is doing is that he is adding the new covenant people into that mix. It's something that we see as we try to like separate in, like with times here and everything. But this whole thing about Jesus coming back and inflicting vengeance on those who do not know God and those who do not obey, and here it's those repay with affliction those who afflict you, is tied to the history of Christians who have been afflicted by the enemy.
That's why I was talking last time that the tribulations are a continual.
It's a continual thing.
Part of the life.
It's part of the life, yeah. And
we're fortunate where we live now.
Right. But even like in our time, I mean, we're in safe part of safe part of the world,
For right
you
now.
know, for right now. And but more Christians were killed during the 20th century than all of the other centuries combined.
Yeah.
And I don't think the 21st century is going to shape up to be much better by the end of that, you know. So there's some there's the way that Christians who are living under persecution would look at a verse like that, um, look at that much differently than we do with our speculations here in the safety of the West, I should say, you know. So and I think that like the more I've thought about it, and it's still something I'm processing, you know, the more there's a lot of other verses that are starting to come to mind where I go, actually that makes more sense now, you know. But it's food for thought. And next time we are going to get into some verses which previously I had thought about. Well, I was told and I had read from several sources that well, once it gets to this point, it has nothing to do with anything that we can show through history. But Barnes walks you through it and goes, no, this is still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. And so I'm going to basically go through a lot of some of Barnes' notes and show you that. But it definitely has something to do with the future, and it's not just I was discussing this a little bit with Evan this morning. You know, I was talking with him, you know, around breakfast, and he made the point that yeah, there's a problem that we have, that when we see certain things happen, we think, is this the time? Is this the time? And it's kind of like, well, in a way, it's always been that time. It's the this when you look at what Daniel is and the prophecies are, it's the story of the great affliction of God's people. Whether you're talking pre-Jesus or post-Jesus, it's still the same family, and that's why I think that I actually like the fact that that, say, you know, some of the early church had you know, like acknowledged that the Maccabean martyrs were martyrs of they saw them as martyrs of Christ, or they see the martyrs of Christ as being the same thing as the Maccabean martyrs, those who hope in their God and are willing to die for their faithfulness to God. And uh, and that's why the writer of Hebrews is comfortable, you know, citing people like that in Hebrews 11, saying that we have a hall of faith to look, and we have a cloud of witnesses who are egging us on and saying, you know, you can do this because we've gone through some of the same things. You know, these are the way that Paul talked to the church was that this is our heritage. Whether he was talking to Gentiles or Jews, he was saying, these are your fathers and these are our examples. You know, so it doesn't treat them as like some part of some other body. There are those who got broken off from that tree, and others who were grafted in, but it's still the same tree. You know. Anyway, I think that's a good place to open it up for questions. Or
Is it time to stop already?
Yeah,
Today was pretty good.
yeah, I like that. You know, I think I overstudied for last one and just got kind of too tangled in the weeds. But yeah, I enjoyed this one. So, and I couldn't decide whether to go into the Maccabean martyrs or start talking about the Maccabean revolt. By the way, the Maccabean martyrs are they're not Maccabeans per se. It's just that they're in the book of Maccabees. They were just Jewish people. But the Maccabean revolt is led by a family of Maccabees. You know, it's named after them. So next time we'll see a little bit of what happened with the Maccabean martyrs. I mean, the Maccabean revolt, and and also how in the end Antiochus Epiphanes was defeated. Um, and and then we'll start wrapping the book up with chapter 12 and looking at the book as a whole, seeing how it all kind of like fit together, hopefully, you know. But I think that was the big takeaway for me this week, was to say, you know, to look at it, that statement. I don't even know if that's kind of like a correct statement to say, but I was like, wait, there is something there. Maybe I would phrase it a different way, but I am definitely finding it to be true that there is a whole history there of because before Daniel's time, it wasn't so much that you were put to torture or death because of your faith. Those there were testings of faith for sure, but it wasn't like you saw in Daniel's stories, like you bow to this guy, God, or you know, you bow to this idol, or we're going to throw you to in the den of lions, or you're going to be thrown into the fiery pit. You know, that really was you know, the attachment of Daniel to these stories is that Daniel and his friends were under that threat. The difference is that, you know, God saved Daniel and met Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and lifted them out of those situations, but they were willing to die. And now the things that Daniel is seeing in the future and that is being given to him is that there's going to be people like you, Daniel, and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, who are going to come, but they are actually going to be burned. They are actually going to be thrown in front of the lions. They are actually, and their story of faith is just like, are just as heroic as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel's.
Even these kids you talked about.
Even these kids, yeah.
I mean, the first son, you might give it as a fluke. You know what I mean?
Right.
Then they see it done. But can you imagine the terror that each one of the kids saw as they were doing that to them?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that the temptation would have been there. Great, okay, well, yeah, we'll just go ahead and do it, right?
Right.
But no, they didn't do that. You know, I don't know too many men,
right,
who would have that kind of courage.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to say, "Oh, yeah, I would do this, I would do that," but until you're really in the situation, you don't know how you're gonna act.
No, right, yeah.
But you have 7 kids who do this, and who knows how young the youngest one was.
Right.
I think it wasn't mainly courage, I think it's mainly faith. They had a lot of faith.
Yeah, faith.
Faith was a cornerstone of what they stood for. And even the younger one.
The poor mom had to see all
to
this.
witness their brothers.
Yeah.
Tortured. It was some tough times back then.
Yeah.
It's almost like what they're doing now with Christians in other countries. We're freedom to do what we do today, but you know, they want to take away history, even from the beginning of time.
I heard the story a couple of years ago about like some teenagers who were like out on some youth camp. I think it was off of Indonesia or somewhere, where like some villagers had gotten a hold of them and were trying to you know, get them to denounce Christ, or you know, under threat of you know, they were going to cut off, they were going to kill them and stuff like that, and they refused to, and the younger brother was killed, and they cut off his arm, and then he was killed, and then when they were going to go to the kids or whatever, it was like a if I remember right, it's like a girl and 2 of her brothers or something like that. All of a sudden, it was like they saw this flash of light, and they were in a different place. Like, and so the question was like, well, what, you know, like one of our brothers died and everything, and then why did we get saved out of it? But still, it was like God who intervened. You know, I heard some preacher telling him, you know, I guess he knew these kids are missionaries or something, I don't know. But you know, under in places where you have such distress, even kids, you know, like are subject to these things, there's always the miraculous. And yeah, it's amazing, you know, like you said, the courage that they have. So courage means heart belief. So it would, you know, cor is like corazon, comes from the same word, core, corazon, or you know, it's like when you say take heart, but it's like, but it's connected to what you believe in your heart. If you believe in your heart that, you know, God is going to resurrect you, believe in your heart of hearts that, you know, that does give you more courage than, you know, just like, oh, I gotta save my own skin right now, you know. But man, to be tested on something like that, you know, was pretty sobering reading this, huh?
Yeah,
No, for sure.
makes me wanna go home and get my Epiphania and start reading these stories.
Yeah, the oh yeah, the Apocrypha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
I think, yeah, I think there's some books in the Apocrypha that are better than others, you
There
know.
are some
You
of
know,
them are kind of
some
silly.
the what is it, Daniel 14? I read some of that and I was like, wow, that's a bunch of nonsense. But you know, but Maccabees, you know, like Maccabees is one, and then another one that seems to be that's important, I think, is the book the book of First Enoch. Also, I don't know, like there's different opinions about First Maccabees versus Second Maccabees. They're two different authors, and it's like two different summaries. But I do think that they're very useful in seeing at the very least how what the Jews believed between the testaments. And we know, like for example, that the Sadducees by Jesus' time, they don't believe in a resurrection, right? At least the Pharisees believed in a resurrection.
Yeah.
But and the resurrection was offensive to the it just was ridiculous to people who were Hellenized, because the Greek way of thought was you want to get rid of this body, and this body is evil, and you want to be set free from it. And it sounds like a lot of way that we think about it, right? That's why I said that, like in a lot of ways, Christians nowadays think more that like Greeks do than the old Jewish people did. They were like, their hope was in a bodily resurrection. I'm going to have my hands back again. I'll have my tongue back again. And God is going to vindicate me by bringing me back to life. And Paul starts seeing that it's more than just a coming back to life. It's a resurrection body, you know, that's glorified and more.
But the thing that is redeeming clause on that are the martyrs who are given the white robes, but they don't have the heads.
Oh, the ones who, well, they've been beheaded.
Yeah.
They probably have their heads. But yeah, I don't know. But see, that's the other thing, is that I'm like, I don't know if, like, say there's an assumption that when you die now and you go to heaven, that you receive your resurrection body. But I'm not sure about that. To me, it seems like your resurrection body is at the time of Jesus' return.
Yeah,
That's
I would say
yeah, the dead in Christ will rise. Well, the dead in Christ are alive. Stephen is alive right now. There's a heavenly council. There's a cloud of witnesses, and they're alive and they're active in heaven. And they, by the way, they care about earth. It's not like they're like blissfully unaware about what's going on with us, you know. Otherwise you wouldn't have a cloud of witnesses egging us on. They know that, you know, the ones who have been killed, who have gone before us, it says the souls of them appeared under the altar, which is an interesting thing. You know, the altar what you did is the animal would be slaughtered outside. What you would do, and you burn the body, and you don't want all this smoke going off, inside the temple, but you would bring the bowls of the blood and you bring it to the altar and you pour out the blood at the base of the altar, under the altar would be another way to put it. But now you've got like a living, you would have like the sacrifice of, these are like sacrificial, the blood of these martyrs. It's a sacrifice under the altar. And they're saying they're concerned. They're not just like, oh, we're really glad to be there here. They are, but they're also, when are we, God, when are you going to do something about this? So they are concerned about it. But I got off on that tangent. But no, as far as like getting the resurrection body, I don't know if in mass that happens until the resurrection.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got that. The main resurrection.
Yeah. And the other thing is that once you're like in heaven, I don't think that like you can attach it to our time anyway. By that time, it's like
I seem to think that for the most part we don't worry about it.
no.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the resurrection body, it says it says, Paul says, the dead in Christ shall rise. That's talking about the physical bodily resurrection, right? Then we who remain, the ones who are on the earth alive and walking at that time, will be transformed. So you get your body, your transformed body without having to die. Like we'll be transformed on the spot, and we'll meet them in the air, to begin ruling with Christ,
That seems almost easier, huh?
yeah. Shortcut that whole death part, yeah, that'd be nice, live until the end, and not have to experience that, but yeah.
It's here and then not.
Yeah.
Anyway,
This little knickknack is, I'll put in resurrection. It says resurrection of the body.
mhm.
The belief that after death, one's departed soul will be restored or resurrected to a bodily life in heaven. The immediate resurrection, the doctrine which states that after one's dead, there is no intimate state such as purgatory for one's soul in its eternal state. That's what is coming up, and you find something in First Corinthians 15 that when the prophet will sound and the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised and perishable, and we shall be changed. The transformation of the body you have now to the body you will have will be instantaneous. All believers will receive this gift at the same time.
Yeah. My questions, that's so, and when Paul talks about like a resurrection body, he calls it a spiritual body, and we think, oh, he means a spirit, like he turned into a spirit, but it's not what he's talking about. And he kind of goes out of his way to explain it. It's kind of like you take a seed and you plant it and it becomes something greater. And he goes, you have sort of the same relationship between, like you have a body of death now, but not the indestructible, but the incorruptible body is one that's it's of a different nature, but it's also something that's tangible, just like Christ's body. Christ has his resurrection body.
What about
That's
all the
what-
what about
Huh?
like all the tangents that he talks about, the tree of life?
The tangents.
Yeah, I mean, like you're planted. You're planted
Oh.
with God, and maybe you're rooted in Christ, and you're talking about coming from a seed and then growing.
Yeah.
I know it's not
Well, I don't-
mystical or anything, but I mean,
No.
there's
This
a lot.
isn't-
There's a lot of references in there. Being the branch, just like in
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just talking about First Corinthians 15 kind of by itself when he goes into that.
Yeah,
But I haven't thought about it like where maybe there is a connection there between other references to, but I'm not really aware. Should dig into that. See if there is. But yeah, I think just read First Corinthians 15 when he gets to that part, and then see if there are other references to other parts. You know, I mean, like there's so many like tree and seed references kind of explain other things, but I don't know if they're all meant to say the same kinds of things.
well, I know there's some in Proverbs, just thinking, I don't know the exact ones, but I know it's in Proverbs.
Mhm.
It talks about the vine and being part of that.
Yeah,
vine,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I
Huh.
mean that's different book. And that was in Proverbs. I'm just recalling right now. Anyways, it's just something I was thinking about.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Hey guys, I'm gonna have to depart.
Okay, John.
All right,
Keep hanging
John.
there, and thank you.
Let me
Appreciate
stop
it.
recording in any case.
Appreciate you guys.